In this video, I will be introducing another type of loop in addition to while loops that we have covered. So to start off with, I'm going to make a new class in my loops project, and I'm going to call this more counts and sums. I'm going to give this a main method. In this class, we are going to take a look at a certain type of loop known as a for loop. For loops are slightly different than while loops in its structure, but require the same kind of information that a while loop needs. A while loop requires three pieces of information: a starting point, a terminating condition, and a way to move from that starting point to the terminating condition, or some sort of increment, some sort of change of state, increment, decrement, whatever it may be. A for loop requires the same three pieces of information, but the places those pieces of information go is slightly different. So to start off with, let us write a for loop that counts from let's say 0 to 10. In a while loop, the starting point, the initiating condition, went outside the loop. The condition went within the parentheses, and the increment went inside the body of the while loop. On the for loop, for the for loop, on the other hand, all those three pieces of information go in one place. The way you can write a for loop that counts from 0 to 10 is as follows: for within parentheses and open close curly braces. All the three pieces of information that a while loop requires also is required for the for loop, but they all go within those parentheses right there. So we start off with for int I is equal to 0. That is our starting point, our initiating condition. The next thing we specify is our terminating condition. I should be less than or equal to 10. And the last part is we want our increment. We want something that changes the state of our loop. I plus plus. I plus plus increments I by 1. And within this condition, for the duration of this condition being true, I less than equal to 10, I want to print out I. And if I run this, I'm just gonna throw this. You will see a for loop that counts from 0 to 10. So really the only difference between a while loop and a for loop is where those pieces of information go: the starting point, the terminating condition, and the increment. You can do a for loop that decrements as well, just like you can do that with a while loop. You can also have a loop that does sums of numbers from 0 to 10. Like the while loop, I'm going to write a for loop that sums numbers from 0 to 10. In this case, again, we need something to keep track of the sum. So I'm going to have an int sum that starts off at 0. The first iteration of the loop, the value of I is 0 and the value of sum is 0. if I add 0 to 0, I will get 0, right? And so sum is the old value of sum plus the current value of I. And then I am going to print out this value of sum every time. So I'm going to keep, as I go through the loop and as I gets incremented every time, I'm going to keep adding that incremented value of I to sum continuously, right? And so sum is basically this running total that keeps adding I to it. And there we go. It's a for loop that sums numbers from 0 to 10. As you can see, sum numbers from 0 to 10 is 55. Now if I took the system on print line and put outside of the for loop, this would only print out once. Now, really, the question y'all might be thinking about is, well, which loop do I use and when do I use it? And really it is up to our discretion. It is up to our preference, your preference, really, which loop you prefer to use. And so there is no hard and fast rule that says you must use this loop for this and you must use that loop for that. While loops and for loops tend to be interchangeable, and so y'all can pick whichever loop y'all prefer. If you think the structure of for loop is simpler, go right ahead and use that. If you think that the structure of a while loop is simpler, feel free to go ahead and use that. Now, another thing we can think about doing is, and so loops, as we've seen, allow us to do repetitive behavior. Now we can use this to do some fairly interesting things. One of the things we can think about doing is times tables, right? I'm sure everyone's familiar with a times table. Like a 5 times table is 5 into 1 and 5 into 2 and 5 into 3, basically giving you the result of 5 into 1, 5 into 2, 5 into 2, 5 into 3, 5 into 4, all the way up to 5 into 12, right? So we can develop times tables for numbers using loops fairly simply. And so let's think about developing a times table for a number that the user inputs, right? So we ask the user, for what number would you like a times table? They type the number in, and we give them a times table all the way that goes up to 12 for that number, right? So again, we want to take user input, so we want to import java.util.scanner. The scanner class allows us to accept user input, and I'm going to create a scanner object called input that reads in from the keyboard. Okay, and so input is that scanner object. Now I want to start off by first prompting the user to type in a number. So I'm just going to prompt the user and say, please enter a number for which you would like a times table. And I'm going to wait. So I'm going to take this number in. So let's call this num. Well, let's call this number, right? Now this has to be an integer, right? Because because number is an integer, so it has to be an integer as well. Okay. Now I want to develop a times table for that number. So really what I want to do is I want to have a counter that goes from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 all the way up to 12, and for each of those incrementing values I multiply number by it. So I can start off at 1, number into 1 is the number into 2 then is something else, number into 3 is something else, and so I want to do that kind of math, and every time I want to print out the number times whatever is the actual multiplication. So I've got to have a counter that goes from 1 to, let's say, 12. So in this case, and so I can use a loop to do that, right? I can use a loop to generate a numbers from 1 to 12 pretty easily. I want to do this with, in this case, a for loop, for instance. So I can say for integer I equal to 1. So I want to start off at 1, just because a number times 0 is 0, so that's pointless. And I less than equal to 12, because I want to give them this number times 12, so like a 12 times table, right? I plus plus. And so basically what this loop is doing is it's taking I all the way from 1 to 12, and that's it. Now what I want to do as I'm going from 1 to 12 is I want to take I and multiply it by the number and print out the result. So I want to say something like system.out.println the product of number times I is number. Let's actually multiply number times I, right? And so every time I increments, that line is executed. The product of number times 1 is the number. The product of number times 2 is whatever number times 2 is. The product of number times 3 is whatever that number is, right? So as I go through that loop, that system.out.println executes every time, and that multiplication is taking place, and the printout is taking place, right? And so I'm just going to throw another header over here. And so let's take a look at this in action. So it's asking me to enter a number for which I'd like a times table. Let's say I want the times table for 12. And so there we go. The product of 12 times 1 is 12, and 24, and 36, and so on and so forth. And so now I can come up with a times table using a loop, right? So instead of writing 12 lines that actually do the math, I'm writing just a loop that goes from 1 to 12 that calculates this automatically. Now, this is interesting because we can take this idea of loops and do some fairly interesting things. Think about now getting user input, right? Think about continuously getting user input, constantly asking the user, hey, you know what? I'm going to keep asking you for times table till you tell me you're done, right? How could we think about building this system where we ask the user whether they want a times table? If they say yes, we ask them then for a number, give them the times table for that number, and then ask them, hey, do you want another times table, right? And if they say yes, we ask them for another number, right? How can we build this logic up? We can think about doing this sequentially, but if we did this sequentially, basically the code will run as many times we copy and paste it. But we can use loops to do this as well, constantly checking whether the user wants another times table, right? And so how can we do this? Well, that is actually going to be your homework, right? And the homework is actually going to be this is your out of class work, which is ask the user whether they want a times table. If they do, then prompt them for a number for which they want the times table. Give them the times table. Ask them again if they want to continue. If they do, then ask for the number again. Right? And so this is your out-of-class work, and this is something that I want you all to think about how you all might actually operationalize this. Now, if you're thinking, I need to have an if statement, close, not exactly. If you're thinking you need to have a loop, well, you do need a loop for the times table, but that loop needs to be maybe situated within another type of structure that's constantly asking, hey, do you want to continue? Hey, do you want to continue? Hey, do you want to continue? Right? And monitoring whether the user is answering yes or no, right? Y or N. And so think about the problem like this. This is what's giving me the times table. I want this, but in addition to just getting a number out, I want to also find out whether the user actually wants a timetable and wants to continuously develop times tables, right? And so think about how you might have multiple types of multiple things going on. You know, um, if you're thinking loop within a loop, that's kind of where I'm going with this. So give it a shot, and let me see how we all have done.